Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be making a crossbody phone bag. This is a smaller bag, but it's loaded with features. It measures in at 5 by 7 inches with a 1/2 inch to a 3.5 inch depth. This bag also has pockets for your cards, phone, keys, and any smaller essential item you can think of. With all that being said, if you are new to the channel, grab that printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need a 1/4 yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a canvas, a denim, a twill. These fabrics are stiff, durable, and very easy to work with. For this project, I'll be using an upholstery fabric, a heavyweight twill, and a lighter weight twill. I typically like to combine random fabrics to see what I can come up with, so like always, get creative with it and use whatever fabric that's really gonna make your design come together. You'll need a 1/4 yard for your secondary fabric, and I recommend using a lighter weight fabric because this is gonna be the lining, and if you add too many thick layers together on the inside and the outside, it can get pretty bulky and hard to sew. I'm actually gonna be doubling up on my lighter weight twill and using that for the lining. So if you do find a medium weight fabric, you can actually use it for the entire bag. But we'll get more into this once we start making the bag. You'll need 2 snap buttons, and realistically, you can use any type of snap button. You can use standard buttons, snap buttons, magnetic buttons. I'll be using magnetic snap buttons. These are the ones that are gonna go on the inside of the bag and you do not see them. I've been really wanting to use these on a project and I found this one will work perfectly. I like the way it closes and it just looks really nice. You'll need 2 yards of a 1/2 inch to 1 inch width webbing. We'll be using this for the strap. I'm also gonna be showing you a different strap method. So if you don't want the webbing look, just stay tuned and we'll get to that later. Going along with that webbing, you'll need 2 D-rings, 2 lobster clasps, and 1 strap slider. And the biggest thing to keep in mind, for whatever width webbing you choose, you'll want to choose the same width hardware. So for example, if you're using a 1/2 inch width webbing, you'll also want to use a 1/2 inch width hardware. You'll need 1 6-inch zipper. I'll be cutting my zipper off of a zipper roll. This is a really good way to go when you're making a lot of bags. You can cut all your zippers to the exact measurements you need and reduce a ton of waste. Also with this pattern, you can use any type of zipper, plastic or metal. So find the best one that goes along with your fabric. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. The pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it off, and you're ready to go. And once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting. With the pattern printed out, you're gonna wanna cut on the outside of the black line. After cutting out your fabric, you're gonna wanna end up with 2 back top panels and 2 back bottom panels. 1 out of your main fabric and 1 out of your secondary fabric for both of these panels. 4 card pocket panels cut out of your secondary fabric. The card pocket panel is optional, so if you're not looking to add the card pockets, you can skip this panel. 2 flat panels cut out of your main fabric. You can really change the look of the bag by switching up the flat panel fabric, so I recommend testing a few different fabrics. You'll need 7 front lining panels, 3 out of your main fabric and 4 out of your secondary fabric. And again, I'm using a medium weight fabric for my lining, so I'm actually going to double up on some of these layers. For the inside main panels, I'll be using the same fabric I'm using for my lining. Just make sure if you are using a heavier weight fabric for your main fabric, you're going to want to switch it up for your lining. But like always, feel free to test it and see what works best for you. Moving on to construction, we're going to start by grabbing our card pocket panels and pressing the top and bottom hem guides. The top and bottom edges are the longer sides that you're going to be rolling over twice. Starting with one of the panels, we're going to roll it over a 1/4 inch and then 1 more 1/4 inch to get rid of that raw edge. With one of the edges rolled over twice, we're going to press it down so it's not moving all over the place while we're trying to sew it. Go ahead and repeat this process for the opposite edge. Move this panel off to the side, grab your other card pocket panels, and do the same exact thing. You don't necessarily need 4 card pocket panels, so if you only want to do 2 or 3, that's totally fine. With all the top and bottom edges pressed, we're going to flip them over to the right side and add a top stitch. For the best results, I recommend using an edge presser foot or some sort of a guide that will help you get a nice straight stitch. Also, matching the thread with your fabric helps hide any imperfections. Next, grab all your card pocket panels and your pattern, and we're going to hem the side edges. The hem is going to be a 1/4 inch, and we're only going to fold it over once. Just like the previous step, we're going to fold it and press it for both sides. And the biggest thing to keep in mind, if you are making multiple card pocket panels, you will want to make sure all your folds are consistent, so all your card panels are the same width. Place these panels off to the side and grab your front lining panel. For this step, we only need one of the main fabric panels, so grab that one and place the rest off to the side. From here, we're going to locate the card pocket placement guide on the pattern, and this is the area we can place the pockets without having them go into the seam allowance or into the magnetic snaps. It's also going to help keep all these pockets centered on the bag. So what I like to do is move the pocket panels off to the side and cut out the button placement guides. Once you have the button placement guides cut out, we're going to place the pattern back on the panel and chalk out where those guides fall. We're not adding the buttons just yet. It's mainly so we can get a reference so we don't go lower than these buttons when replacing the pocket panels. When you have all your pockets within the guide, we're going to sew one at a time. Starting with the pocket closest to the top edge of the front panel. Place a few pins to keep the panel in place and stitch just the bottom edge. This pocket is the start, so keeping it square is very key. Place the other pocket directly on top and stitch just the bottom edge. And if your card panels are not lining up right, you can dethread them, refold them, and try again. Keep repeating this process for the rest of your card pocket panels, and remember, only sew the bottom edge at this time. And another quick tip, I like to sew directly on top of my top stitch. Once all the card pockets are sewn on and lined up, we're going to stitch both of the side edges as close as you can to the edge. You mainly want to make sure you're sewing directly on top of that fold underneath. Depending on the fabric you're using, it can get pretty bulky, so I recommend using a heavier weight needle. And these pockets can be pretty tricky to keep lined up, but the more you do this, the better you will get at it. Also, you do have room for more pockets, so if you want to add another pocket, you can totally do that. Or even change the height of the pocket to make it a deeper pocket. Staying with the front panel, we're going to place a pattern back on top, make sure our button placement guides are still chalked out. If everything is still lined up and looking good, we're going to grab our magnetic snaps. I'm using the hidden magnetic bag snaps. These are super strong and they make for a real nice product. Another magnetic option is using a magnetic snap button. These ones are exposed on the bag. They're also strong. And a cool thing about them is they bring out a different factor when it comes to the design. Jumping back to the front panel, if you are using the second option, you're going to want to cut and press these into place. But for this project, I'm using the hidden magnets. So what you're going to want to do first is separate the magnets. Typically each side is color coded so you don't get them mixed up and they won't snap together. Once you determine each of the sides for your magnets, we're going to use that same color for the front panel. The magnets will be sewn to the wrong side of the panel. Flip the panel to the wrong side, and I actually like to use the pattern to mark out the button placement guides on the wrong side as well. Place the buttons on the guides and stitch around the outside edge. When it comes to sewing on any magnetic hardware, it will try to stick to the presser plate, so just take your time and try to make a neat box around the outside edge. Grab the opposite side of the magnet, throw them on, see if everything snaps into place. If it's looking good, you can place this panel off to the side and grab your flat panels. In this step, we're going to be adding the opposite sides of the magnet, so we only need the back flat panel. If you're using the same color fabric for both of the panels, it doesn't matter which panel you choose. Just like the previous step, we're going to start by cutting out the button placement guides on the pattern, placing the pattern on top of the wrong side of your flat panel and chalking out your placement guides. Grab the opposite side of your magnetic closure, place them on the placement guides, and stitch around the outside edge of the magnet. And a quick tip, you may want to change the needle position closer to the object you're sewing. This will help get your stitch closer to the object without changing your presser foot. And just like that, the opposite sides of your magnets are sewn onto your flat panel, so grab the opposite side of the flat panel, place the right sides together, lining up both of the panels, and stitch the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, keeping the top edge open. I like to keep the panel with the magnets facing up so I don't accidentally stitch over them. Double check and make sure all the layers got stitched together, and from here we're going to flip the right sides out. At this point, you're going to want to poke all the corners out and line up the edges all the way around the outside. And at this point, we're going to add a top stitch all the way around that outside edge. This step is optional. I like to add this because it makes that flap look really nice and professional. And when it comes to top stitch, again, you're going to want to make sure you match the thread with the fabric color you're using. This helps hide any imperfections and overall makes for a nicer look. I left the bobbin color tan so you can compare the difference of changing out the thread. Moving on, grab your back bottom panel and your back top panel. For this step, we will be using the main fabric and the secondary fabric for both panels. Find your 6-inch zipper or any zipper that's long enough to go past the width of these two panels. You can always snip the zipper ends if it goes way past the panel edges. We're going to first sew the back top panel onto the zipper, so place the other panels off to the side. Line up the right side of the zipper with the right side of the main fabric, and the right side of the secondary fabric with the wrong side of the zipper. Make sure the panels are lined up, and we're going to stitch the zipper edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Check both sides to see if the panels are lined up and stitch to the zipper. Flip the wrong sides together, add a pin to keep the panels out of the way. Grab both of your back bottom panels, both the main fabric and the lining, and we're going to stitch them to the opposite side of the zipper. Place the right side of the zipper to the right side of the main fabric of your back bottom panel, and the right side of your secondary fabric to the wrong side of the zipper. Make sure the bottom panels line up with the top and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip the wrong sides together just like we did the top panels. Before we add a top stitch, check to see if the top edges and bottom edges of the main fabric and the secondary fabric are lining up. If the panels are lining up correctly, add a top stitch to both sides of the zipper. The top stitch really helps clean up those panels and gives it a nice flat look. I also like to check one more time after stitching to make sure the top and the bottom panel line up. For the next step, grab your flat panels, your front lining panels, and your complete back panel that you've just sewn together. We're going to start by placing the flat panel on the complete back panel with right sides together. Line up the top edge of the back panel with the top edge of the flat panel. Locate one of your secondary fabrics from your front lining panel. This will end up being the lining for the bag, so make sure you grab the correct front lining panel. With the correct lining panel in hand, we're going to place it directly on top of our complete back panel and flat panel with right sides together. Place 2 of your main fabrics and 2 of your lining fabrics off to the side. At this point, you should have 2 main fabrics and 2 secondary fabrics off to the side and 1 secondary fabric under your front lining panel. Take the secondary fabric that was under your front lining panel, place the right sides together directly on top of your front lining panel. And before we do the same thing for our remaining panels, we're going to grab the pattern, locate the pocket attachment guide, and this will be on your front lining panel. And what I like to do is fold the edges inward and mark with chalk. And we're making this mark on the last 2 of our main fabric panels. For the next mark, we're going to fold one of the sides inwards directly on top of that pocket attachment guide. Mark both panels and do the same thing for the opposite side of that pocket attachment guide. This is just a quick and easy way to get a precise stitch guide on both of our main panels. Grab the secondary fabric, place it directly on top of the main fabric with right sides together. Repeat this process for the opposite 2 panels, making sure all the edges are lined up. From here, we're going to stitch just the top edges on all of these panels at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If done correctly, you should have 1 secondary fabric or lining fabric paired up with 1 main fabric. And if you are using the same fabric for the entire bag, it shouldn't be so confusing. From here, we're going to place the wrong sides together. When it comes to the panel that has the flat panel sewn in, we're going to flip that flat panel up away from both of the secondary fabric and the main fabric. Make sure all the edges are lined up and add a top stitch to the top edge. And again, when it comes to the assembly with the flat panel, just flip that flat panel up so you don't accidentally stitch it down with your top stitch. It does help using an edge presser foot to get a nice straight top stitch on these top edges. And once you added the top stitch to all the panels, just double check, make sure all the layers got stitched together, the edges are all lined up. And from here, we're going to place the panel with the zipper and the panel with the card pockets off to the side, leaving us only with the panels that have the attachment stitch guide. Open up both panels and place the right sides together, lining up the attachment stitch guide on both of our main fabric. As you can see, it's kind of hard to see where to stitch, so we're going to grab the pattern one more time and mark out the pocket attachment guide on the wrong side of one of our main panels. And for this to be aligned correctly, just make sure the bottom edge of the pattern is lined up with the bottom edge of the main fabric, and double check both sides to see if the wrong side lines up with the right side. When both sides are aligned, place a few pins and grab your 1/2 inch to 1 inch webbing. If you're wondering, I'm using a 1/2 inch webbing for this project, and you're going to cut 2 3-inch strips. You can customize the length of these strips, but we'll get into that in a second. Grab both of your D-rings and feed the webbing through the D-ring, lining up the webbing on both sides of the D-ring. Locate the panels with the pocket attachment guides. Using the pattern one more time, we're going to find the D-ring placement guides. Realistically, you can place the D-rings anywhere along the edge, but I'm going to place them directly at the guides to make it easy. This is why we cut a little bit extra webbing, because we want it on the inside of that stitch guide. You can pull it out a little bit more and have the D-rings exposed if you're going for that sort of look, but you want enough webbing on the inside of that stitch guide, so when you're actually carrying the bag, it's secured and doesn't pull out of that stitch. With all that being said, we're going to place it on the inside between both of our main panels. And the biggest thing here is to make sure that they're lined up the same distance from the outside edge on both sides of the panel. Once you have everything aligned and pinned down, stitch directly on top of the chalked pocket attachment guide. Be sure to add a nice tack stitch at the start and the end of this stitch. This is a very crucial stitch, so double check to make sure the webbing is lined up on both sides and you really secured it down with a nice tack stitch because you don't want these pockets ripping apart. Next, we're going to flip the secondary fabric back up and grab our complete back panel. Do the same thing for the back panel, flip the secondary fabric up, move the flat panel to the same side as the secondary fabric, pull the zipper train towards the center of the panel, move over to the inside panels and fold the top layer towards the inside. This will expose the bottom layer that should have the right sides facing up. Add a few pins and lastly move the D-rings away from the outside edge. At this point, we're going to take the complete back assembly and place it directly on top of our inside assembly with right sides together. The secondary fabric will line up with the secondary fabric and the main fabric will line up with the main fabric. Make sure the flap is clear of the outside edges. Flip the secondary fabric back up and we're going to stitch the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving the top edge open on the secondary fabric. I like to start on the side with the main fabric and move towards the secondary fabric. And from here, I sew both of the side seams before I sew the bottom. And when it comes to sewing over the zipper, just take your time and hand crank it if you need to. After finishing off the bottom edge, we're going to flip it around, make sure all the layers got stitched together, find the open edge in the secondary fabric, and pull the right sides out. With the right sides out, we're going to go through, poke out the corners, make sure all the edges are looking good, move this assembly off to the side, and grab our card pocket assembly. From here, we're essentially going to do the same thing we did in the previous step. Fold and pin as much as that top layer as you can towards the center of the bag. Place the card pocket assembly directly on top with right sides together and stitch the outside edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving that top edge open. And again, that top edge is the secondary fabric. Just like the last step, I sew the side edges and then the bottom edge. After completing the stitch, we're going to check all of the edges, make sure all the layers got stitched together, find the opening in the secondary fabric, and pull the right sides out. And just like that, our bag is almost complete. I like to check everything out before I seal off the pockets. If everything's looking good, we're going to move up to the pocket openings in the secondary fabric. This step is super simple. All we're going to do is roll that fabric towards the inside so the right sides are touching. I like to keep the roll to about a 1/4 inch. Anything over that will make the lining a little bit smaller than the outside main pocket. Repeat this process for both of your openings and add a top stitch. Adding this final stitch will complete the sewing portion for the bag. The last thing we do before we make the strap is move the lining towards the inside of the main pockets. There is one more small step, but for now we can move the complete bag off to the side and grab our 1/2 inch to 1 inch webbing. Cut 1 2-yard strip. You can cut this longer or shorter, but I recommend starting at 2 yards and trimming it down. Start by grabbing your strap slider and placing it on your webbing. Feed the webbing through both openings of the slider and move the slider about 1 foot down the webbing. Grab one of your lobster clasps, feed the webbing through the opening on the clasp, the same side as the slider. The next step can get kind of confusing, but we're going to take the same end of the webbing and feed it through the slider from the back side, starting at the furthest opening and then feeding it back through the nearest opening. When the webbing is through the nearest opening, we're going to pull it out about 2 inches, roll the webbing end over once, and lay it back onto the opposite side it went through the first opening. Move the other webbing out of the way and add a nice tack stitch. With the webbing end tacked down, we're going to move to the opposite side of the webbing, grab our last lobster clasp, feed the webbing end through the opening on the clasp, roll the end over once, and place it on the opposite side of the webbing, and add our final tack stitch. And you can actually do a box stitch, an X stitch, or just a couple bar tack stitches. All these stitching techniques will hold the strap together and work nicely. As you can see, the strap slider moves up and down the strap nicely, adjusting the strap. And this is why I say start with 2 yards for this type of strap, because you can really adjust it to be fairly small. Grab the bag, locate the D-rings, clip the clasps to the D-rings, and you can try on your bag. Before we totally finish off the bag, there is one more thing I want to show you. If you use fancier looking fabrics, you might want to look into a chain strap. These come in all different types of finishes and sizes and could really make your bag look nice. It's just another fun, quick thing to look into. And moving on to the last step, that is adding your branding. You can add it anywhere on the bag. I branded leather and attached it with double-sided rivets, but feel free to use whatever you want. There you have it, your crossbody phone bag is complete. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. Hopefully your bags turned out awesome. If they didn't turn out great the first try, I recommend trying it a few times. Some of these smaller bags, it takes a few tries to really perfect it. But with every bag you make, the better you will get at sewing and designing in general. And you'll start to see fun things you can add onto these patterns, like more pockets, more zippers, make them bigger, smaller. And another quick thing, I really like seeing what people come up with. So definitely tag me on Instagram. My Instagram is @ProperfitClothing, and I'll definitely check out your work. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.